Hi, this is Craig, and in this video we're going to mix down the song Kenny's Song, which we've been recording from start to finish. Let's do it. Hi, this is Craig from Craig Colley Music. Welcome. Hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. We are finally at the point where we are going to start mixing down the tracks that we have been recording for quite some time now on a song from start to finish. If this is the first time watching this, you might want to click this card here and watch the previous episodes, because that way you'll see how we got to this point. We've already recorded the grand piano, the bass, the drums, several acoustic guitars, several electric guitars. We've laid in some other instruments for flavoring, I guess that's a word, to color the sound, an organ, some sampled vocals, and a string patch, along with the shaker and tambourine. So we've got all sorts of things to balance in this mix. Some of the things that I have already recorded I will not be using, but what I'm going to start with is show you what it sounds like so you can hear it finished, and then we'll go back and I'll show you how I put it together for this final mix. If this is the second or third time you've seen me and you haven't subscribed yet, that's probably the world telling you you need to subscribe, so I hope that you do that. And if you're getting value from this, please like the videos anytime you like to do that throughout the video session. So let's get into it. Now we switch to the computer screen, and I put on my headphones and also my glasses so I can see, keep you company here in the lower corner. Let me move that around as we go. First, I'll give you an overview of what the tracks look like, and the software that I use once again is Mark of the Unicorn Digital Performer 10, and this is the original track that we laid in there for a reference track that we're not using. These are the 3 grand piano tracks that have been recorded, 3 different microphones on that, and past videos go through all of this in detail, every one of the instrument recordings. This set of tracks is the acoustic guitars, electric guitars, the bass, drums. This is a shaker, this is a tambourine, and this is an organ part, and some sampled ahs and some strings. There's several things that are in this configuration that I'll show you after we record a mix of this. I have this channel turned on. This is a return bus from my main mixing panel that feeds back into the software. Channel is turned off so we don't monitor it, but it's going to record the track. I've already got the markers in at the beginning of the song and at the end of the song from these markers here. They're already into the start position and the stop position, and the record in and the record out. We're going to auto record at the starting point and we'll go out. So I'm going to play it. I'm going to turn off my microphone so there's no interference, and we're going to listen through the final mix and then come back and show you how I got there. There we have it, the final mix. And now I'm going to go back and review how we got there. This also is the final mix track that I would then transfer out for mastering. We'll do that in another session. What I will do right now though is check that to make sure that recorded correctly. So I'm going to solo that, go to my mixing board, and make sure nothing else is soloed, just the mix track, which is there. Nothing else in the solo loop there. And now I'll go back to my sequence and I will play that from the beginning just to make sure it's there. So now we're listening to this track here. Now it's fairly level, fairly flat in a way, but nothing is peaked out when I really blow it up to look at it. I may do that again and record it as just a little bit hotter, but that's good for this example right now. So now let's back up and show you how I got there. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to each instrument and turn off all the plugins that I have put on. The plugin, if you're watching for the first time, is an additional audio interface that's inserted in the loop and gives it different sound characteristics. And I'll leave those on, turn those off and those off. And I'm going to go through instrument by instrument how we got there. And almost all off at this point. And this one too. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to solo the grand piano without any effects, anything on it at all. In fact, it has a touch of reverb, and I'm going to turn that off as well. And I will do that in this other page here. I actually have a second computer running on a Mac Mini that I have all of the reverbs that are in place there. But for right now, I'm going to, I know that's in this master fader here. I'm going to pull that master fader down, and that should turn off the reverb so we don't hear that. I'm going to play it from the top now. Now you notice right away I've got some distortion because I turned it up after I had added these plugins here. So I'm at plus 480 there. So in this case I'm going to pull that down just a little bit so we can hear what that sounds like without any effect on the piano. So the first thing that I did, I added, this is by Waves. This is the Puke Child, never sure how to say that, Puke Child. I'm butchering that, I apologize. 670. And I'm going to turn that on so you can hear the difference that makes. Right away it's boosted the signal more than I wanted to. I'm on auto here. Let me pull that back again. Tough to demonstrate that way. Okay, here we go. It just gives it a little depth. Then I go to the second plugin, which is the Triple D, and turn this one on. And right there you can hear the different clarity sound. Pull that back up now that that's on. I'm not going to go deep into what these plugins do. I have separate videos on how all these work, but this is the plugin chain, and you can hear the changes as I add them. Third one is Poltec. Once again, just a little more warmth, a little more color. And the final one is a parametric EQ that's been programmed to pull out these frequencies right here so they don't compete with other instruments that are taking the melody over. This fluctuates throughout the piece, and it's already been programmed into the channel on the sequence window, which I'll show you now. So on the sequence window, I'll move these out of the way. I program changes of volume, pan, and in this case EQ. This one is under insert 4-band frequency, and I'm going to go to gain. So there's the gain, and you'll see at this point of the piece, this is going to come down over here now. I mean, right here. Now it's very subtle, but it's enough so when the other instruments come in, which I'll turn back on here. Now it's not going to sound exactly right yet because all the other plugins are turned off and the mix is different. So that's what I've done with the piano, and that changes throughout the piece. It gets higher and lower depending on the spot, and mainly to thin it out. Also, the piano has volume programmed into it and pan. I actually pull it off to the right side and really far right at this point in the song where the acoustic guitars, electric guitar completely take over the melody and then bring it back. And you can see in the bridge, the pan comes up to the center for his bridge part, then comes back here, and at the very ending it pans center again. So we'll go back to solo and you'll hear this change here. Slowly goes back. And then when it gets to this point, it comes full center stage. You'll also see this dip go back up to flats because it's just the piano part we wanted as full as it originally sounded. Pans over a little bit and ends the piece that way. Also, a little bit of reverb added to the piano. Let me back that up just a tad. Turn the reverb back up a little bit. It's in this channel, there's bus 5 here, and bus 5 feeds into, on the second computer, it feeds into this Spaces 2 East-West reverb plugin, which I love. It's a very deep, rich sounding, lots of different settings, but I use a normal plate on it, but it's a nice big sound. I'll exaggerate it here. And I only use a little bit of it, not very much. So when you stop it, you can really hear what it's doing. It just gives it a little bit more warmth. I did have the option of this plugin here, which is a Waves reverb plugin, but I opted to use the other one instead because I like it. It's a better sound for this piece. So that is what the piano consists of as far as the plugins and the reverb and the effect on that channel. Now let's go to the bass. On the bass setting, I'll solo that now. That's the bass just flat. Now the bass does have a little bit of volume written into it, but very little, only a little bump at the very beginning. This is the master channel for it, so I write it in there. So at the beginning where it's just bass and piano, I have it come in a little louder at this point right here. And then here it will turn down. Go back to the mixing board, and these are the plugins that I use. First of all is this Master EQ, and it just pulls a little of the bottom out and has some pinpoint spots that I use to boost and cut a little bit. And once again, so it doesn't compete with other instruments and makes the bass punch a little bit more using that. Second one I put in is a parametric that does the same thing again, but gives a little more clarity to it. Once again, it's very subtle. Then I add the Waves CLA 2, This pulls it up and warms it up. This tightens it up a little bit. There's very little gain change, you can tell. And it's on the compressor setting, 60 Hertz, and the high frequency setup there. And I'll save this as a preset. And then the final thing I add is the submarine, also by Waves, which gives it a very subtle bottom. It really is only effective when you listen to it through a subwoofer, or actually a smaller speaker, and even a phone, because that way it gives it a little bit more bottom on smaller and larger systems. In the middle, you don't hear it too much. I'll turn it off. It's really just dropping the octave down, a lower octave, and get a little more bottom. You have to be really careful of using that if you are using a low-end plug-in on anything, not to do too much. Always do less so you can barely hear it, because when you go to master, you're going to add probably more bass on the bottom, and you don't want this to be too muddy. And sometimes you don't even need it on the track, but in this case, it's just there slightly just to give it that little bit lower texture and sound. So that's what I have built into the bass sound. The first two plugins, the Master EQ and the Parametric, are from Motu's collection, and then the second two are from Waves. Now I'll go over to the drums. The drums are going to take a little bit longer because there's all sorts of things happening with these drums. I'm going to go back to the second verse where they come in and play just the drums. Now this is the toms. You're going to have a little extra reverb on that, and a little extra on the snare. Just so that gives it a little more depth in the snare. Now the primary instrument used on this is Superior Drum 2. That's where the samples are coming from. And within this drum set here, it already has a mixer built in and plugins. So I'm going to show you that first, but before I do that, I'm going to turn off these reverbs that are in this channel over here. And turn off both of these reverbs. They're just on the snare and on the tom. Nothing else, no other reverb on anything else, because there are a little bit of effects already on the drums through its own interface. Also, I'm going to use my keyboard here, and I'm going to trigger some of the drum sounds. It's not very loud yet because I have everything turned off. So now going back to the mixer. Now we are in the drum area here. You can see that the overall mix is here. I'm going to turn up the whole volume just for a moment here. So this is a comp, meaning that the snare, toms, and kick are all in this channel. I'm going to start with the kick drum. There we go. Move this mixer back here. And on the mixer inside Superior Drum 3, there are actually EQs that are already built into the sound that I'm already using. In this case, has this EQ curve here, and also the classic compressor as well. So without them, starting with that, compressor get a little more bottom and a little more oomph out of the kick. You can see it's notched out here for an unwanted tone. And that's the EQ that is on the kick drum. Next, and you can turn them on and off here to hear the difference. And there's also a kick that's in the kick in, kick out. There's two different kicks used. So that's with that. And then there's a sub kick EQ on that as well. And then we go to the snare. This also has a bottom snare. You can hear just the bottom sound or the top sound. And an EQ that's already on. It looks like that. Not very much difference. Just a little bit. And what I like about the Superior Drum Mixer is not very taxing on the CPU. So there's the mix of the snare and the bottom snare. I'm going to go to the hi-hat. And I've learned this about this drum set, that the hi-hat oftentimes does not trigger very well. So you have to play the track till you can get it so it's open. So I have to go back and find a spot where the hi-hat's playing. And hopefully catch it the right spot. There we go. So I stopped it in between where it didn't open and close. Without playing the kit, sometimes you get stuck on that. So there's a pro tip of why your hi-hat doesn't work sometimes when you're trying to trigger it with your keyboard. I don't have the hi-hat very high in this. Once again, the EQ looks like this, or that, I'm sorry, the classic compressor and an EQ on the hi-hat looks like this. Kind of crazy, because most of the sound is in this range here, not at the bottom. So there's no reason for it. Then we go to the toms, 4 different toms. And they all have a similar EQ, a little bit different, but I won't show them all, but they all have that EQ, and this one here without the EQ on. A little more boomy than you want it to be. That EQ is set up so it doesn't really compete with bass and other things that may cause it to have a boomy sound. So those are the tom-toms. Then we go to the ride cymbal, which is over here, and this is under the overhead. This actually has 3 different EQ plugins to give it that sound, and this is what they are. So we've got this 3 inserts here. First one's up here. I'll turn them off independently. Turn this first one back on. Gives it more glassy. Makes it a little fatter. And also kind of a combination of both. And this one is really compressing a little bit just to give it more of an even sound. So that is the 3 inserts I'm using on the actual ride cymbal, which is part of the overheads. And we've got these ambient sounds that are really mics that are out in front of the whole kit, that the instruments come through those as well. I'm going to go back to this window for a moment and talk about that. With the ambients on, they sound like that, but without them, a little bit subtle on the... I'm exaggerating that, but that's the room sound that goes along with that. Now every other drum also is coming through that ambient sound. So it can be part of your mix. So on the, if I turn the ambient way up, you almost get more of a, I guess more of like a Led Zeppelin vibe, because you get a big room sound going. This one's much tighter. It gets looser the more you turn up your ambient sound. Back to the mixer. You can see how complicated this is. Then we've got all the kicks going through this channel, the snares going through this channel, and the toms going through this channel with a whole nother set of EQs and compressors on it. On the kick, we have that setting there, and this EQ here, and this EQ here. 3 different EQs on that. That's without it. That's with it. And same thing in the snare, without it. So a lot of the EQing on these instruments is done prior to getting into the DAW. And I use these because it's not so stressful on the CPU. And on the tom-toms, also a little bit of plate reverb on both of these, not very much, just a tad. And then these comp channels are routed into these channels beside digital performers. So that comp channel is coming in here for the kick, and in here for the snare, and in this channel here for the tom-toms. And at this point I can still add additional effects, plugins, EQ, and so on, but I don't really need to do much. I'm only going to add just a touch of room reverb on that, and a little bit on the toms. And this channel here is the comp of all three. Don't know why that's showing mixer options there. I'm going to go to a different page and see if that will go away. It's not. How about that? I've never seen that before. So there's a interesting bug, but we're not going to stop for that right now. I'll just stay out of the way. So this is a comp of just the kick, snare, and toms and a side chain, and more beefy with them. So you can have a little bit more control over those instruments, those snare and toms, versus to make them fatter. Got to bring this back to 0, I think, where it was. Now, the final piece is putting these two plugins in. I put this through a plugin through Waves that simulates 3 different boards: spike board, mic board, and a Neve board. They just have them categorized that way. So I'm going to play the drum track, and I'm going to turn these on and off. Start it here. You can hear the difference. And I turn it on. So what it's doing, it's actually simulating going through this board. In this case, this is a British styled board, and also driving the board a little bit, get a little more harmonic distortion in the sound. That's the Neve board and the spike board. They all have the different characteristics. This one I chose the British sound for this. If I push this drive, it's distorting the board a little bit. Don't want to do too much. Then the second plugin is this Schweppes plugin. I hope I'm saying that right. And this is an amazing plugin that has all sorts of different plugins within the plugin. Play it again. Turn this on. And this is where the whole drum set really comes alive. Now if I'm going to go back and turn these off, you're going to hear a distinct difference. Now these have already been preset and pre-tweaked, so to speak, so that the sound's already there, and in separate videos I will cover how I get to this point. But for the sake of what we're showing you here, this is how the drum sound was developed. I have to remember where that was, honestly, where it is in the mix, and go back to here and probably had that at 0. Now, the other plugins aren't all there yet, so it's not going to sound right yet. But now we're going to go to the acoustic guitars, which are in this area here. So I'm going to solo all the acoustics. And let's go back to the the second verse where they come in. Up for a moment. Now that's without any plugins. So overall I have 2 acoustics, in this case a Martin and a Gibson, that once again we had recorded and did a video on how we did these tracks. These are split left and right. And now I'm adding this JJP plugin for acoustic guitar. Flat, the character this gives it, great plugin. All sorts of settings on this, different videos on this plugin here, but this is how I have it set for this overall sound. That means all the acoustic guitars in this subset are going through this master fader here, and this is being applied to it. So those are the two rhythm guitars. Now there's also, at the beginning of that part, a arpeggiated capoed guitar, which is this one here, I believe. Now it's a little muddy, so I go back to the triple D on this. And I also use an API. Back that up again. And I use a RX. Give it a little more color. So three different components on that one sound. And I'll go through them again. Back that up again. First the triple D, the Manny M. Add the API, EQ. The Renaissance sax just gives a little more punch. And only reason this was recorded is just to accentuate the downbeat of each chord. And I'll play that with the two acoustic guitars, and you'll hear them chime a little bit stronger than they would without it. I'm going to turn off that capoed guitar this time. With it. And then the soloed. Now these are also through their own subgroup over here that's going through this plugin here, the CLA 3A, which gives this thing a lot more punch and boost. I'll play that same part again. Without it. So that's the plugin used there. And there's just a slight bit of a little bit of reverb on the channel, but not enough to really even show because there's so much going on. It doesn't require reverb. It's just going to make it muddier. Don't use reverb unless you absolutely have to. So that's our acoustic sound. Now we're going to go to the electric guitar sounds, which are over here. And what's interesting about these electric sounds is I recorded lots of different tracks, ended up not using them in certain areas, and they drop in and out. Same thing with the acoustic guitars. This here was a part I thought I was going to use in this subset here, and I decided not to because I didn't need it. So these volumes are coming up and down at places that it just is going to be in the way or compete because there's so many tracks going all at the same time with this piece here. Going back down to the electric guitars, same thing there. As I added instruments I had recorded thinking they would all work, and they do individually, but as a whole group it was too much. And when this second verse comes in, I had these two chunking guitar parts going, but I drew it down. This is the volume I threw it down because it was in the way of everything. It didn't help. It made it muddier and you couldn't really distinguish it. But I wanted it strong in this bridge part, so that's what happened there. There's also this part here. I'm going to turn this off for a moment and play just this tele guitar. This is also playing the same part as the capoed guitar I showed you in the acoustic set. So I'll play both of these. So that's the tele sound, and I'm using this group here from Waves. This is the GTR plugin with a range of different effects you can put into the sound. And in this case, I have a little gate, little EQ, no phase, no chorus. The amp goes there, and a little delay and a little spring reverb. Amp setting is this here on the punchy mode. And this sound works quite well. It's actually from one of the presets that comes with the plug-in set itself. And I like it, and it worked just great. Sometimes you just don't have to overthink things. If you've got something that already works, or you've made a tweak on it, and you can save it for your own setting or your own adjustment to it. Sometimes right out of the box works great too. And this is such a simple part that it doesn't need to be complicated and spend a lot of time on something you can't really tell too much difference on. Play that again. As I said before, the sound of the guitar, that's what was recorded. So I record the guitars completely dry and completely flat into the software so I can have complete control over the sound and change it as I need to. And I'll show you this next set of guitars exactly how that works. So that's that rhythm part. The second guitar part, which is this set here, in this bridge area, you're going to hear that come in. Now I thought they would work from the beginning. I'm going to pull the volume up here. But it only got in the way of everything, so I decided not to use that and brought it into the chorus. So let's look at the sounds that I used on those two. First of all, I used the GRT again on both of them, but I selected different patches for each guitar. And the guitars are set up different on the pickups. So these are the two guitar sounds that I chose for Guitar 1 and Guitar 2. Also added, this is the amp on this setting here. Just a nice drive sound, and then this is the amp on this setting here. You can see what I used. But since they're panned left and right, the second amp on either side doesn't really factor in. But I also added some EQs that are somewhat similar, yet a little bit different. And I'm going to get to another verse where they're doing that chunk sound, and you'll hear it. So when I turn those EQs on, they separate a little bit more. Back that up and turn those off. Turn it back on. Off. And you can see the frequencies are close, but they're in different spots. 125 cut there, an 83 cut there, a 2000 boost there, and a 4000 boost there, just to make them a little bit different. And it works quite well in the mix. So that's what's on those two guitars. Going to the third guitar, which is the solo lead guitar. This is the sound set on that from, once again, the GRT. Let me play that section without the plug-in. I'm using the gate, a little overdrive, a little express, a little EQ, a little ADD, and a little bit of reverb on it. And then the amp setting is the edgy amp 1 and amp 2. Now this is more of a stereo feed because of the way that this instrument is more of a solo instrument and more centered and not split as much. It goes a little bit to the right, but still more centered than not. In the actual sequence, I turn this volume up quite a bit. There's a section here where the lead guitar is introduced and has to come up quite loud to get over the rest of the track. You can see this peak here, that indicates that. And you can hear a lot of reverb on that. I'll jump ahead here, and this is into a little more of the solo section, the second bridge. just noticed right there. Sounds like a bad punch, so let me fix that. Couldn't even hear it in the mix, but I can see it there. I'm going to pull that over. There we go. You get the idea there. A lot of trail on that, but that's okay. There's very little of that going on in any other instrument. Actually, none that have that much reverb on it. So that is how the guitars are set up. Now we will go to the organ part, which is here. I'll go to the bridge part to play that. And this is through East-West Play. And this is a Fab 4 sound. Sure wish this would go away. Just pre-programmed out of the box. I just used the Get Back organ from the Fab 4 collection. And now we'll go to the oohs and the ahs. In the last video we showed actually how we did this, so I'm not going to cover that, but this is where that's coming from. Back to the bridge part. Now in this play interface I also have so it punches through a little bit more. I use this Tone Shaper by Manny M. Some more breath to it. And also, since that is on the Play submix channel, that also affects the organ that you heard as well. Makes it a little bit brighter. And we'll go over here to the strings, which are through Native Instrument Contact Player. And these are cinematic strings. Their first collection here. Go to the bridge again. You can see it being played here. A little bit of reverb on that, but that's more of a background pad, not a lead part. But it is pronounced enough where you can hear it and it fills that section in. So those are those voices. Let's go over here to the tambourine part now. So in the tambourine part, it's panned over a little bit to the right, has a little bit of reverb on it, that room reverb again, without it. Not very much, just enough to give it a little bit more, especially on the single hits. And then at the very end, there is a shaker part, which is here. I'll just leave those both on. And that's just rolling across the sound spectrum because I have it on a pan to go left to right, which is, you can see this black line here, which is the pan, and the volume comes right down on it again. That's the only place I used it. I said previously that I actually had recorded that in the entire track, but it didn't work. It competed with everything. And I really just ended up not using it. But I think I have covered all the tracks. Let's back up and make sure I didn't miss anything. Takes a while to get through this. And a lot of mixing that I do, I always program in volumes as I'm mixing different instruments. So by the end, when I actually run the final mix, it's already done. So let's go back, make sure all the plugins are back on. Go back to the top, and let's have another quick listen. I'll bounce around. Now you're going to see this piano come down and pan a little bit when it gets to the verse that's coming up. This is dropped out because there was a part I turned out not using. Here it comes. Pans a little bit over. Because at this point the piano is still the primary instrument. And then you're going to hear a kind of a question and answer part coming up on the C minor part, where this will now come up. And I just realized my acoustics are way too loud. I turned off my auto volume on this. Now watch, since I turned it back on, when I go to trigger the play button, this is going to drop down into its right spot. So if you are going to solo and listen to different instruments, you have to turn off the auto to change that level, but as soon as you turn it back on, it'll remember what you already put in there. And here's the capo part. It's going to come back up. You can also see here that the chunking guitars, chunking electric guitars, the master is down because it competed, it didn't work. Now it's going to come up when the bridge part happens. Right there, you can really hear that tambourine cutting through, but I love it. It gives it that little extra punch. And right there was that little guitar part that you'll see that fade up there. Introduces electric guitar. Coming up right here. Now at this point, the grand piano is all the way, almost all the way to the right, and the acoustic guitars, these two acoustics, have now taken over the melody, which also leaves room for that chunky guitar. Now it's in there. I'll back that up from that beginning of that verse. And then the electric guitar comes in at a lower octave and doubles it. Now this will take over the melody. And you notice the chunky guitars, they dropped out. They're out because it was too much, made it too muddy. And also let you hear that Telecaster guitar with those little chops. So pulling things out of the mix can be very helpful. Everything does not have to be on all the time. Especially at this point, there was a harmony in these two acoustics, which was really nice, and with the other instruments, and you couldn't hear it at all, but now you can. This is that electric guitar part. And a good example of a lick that just needed to come through just a little bit more. This little part coming up right now, you'll see this is the volume on that electric guitar solo. It bumps up just here so you can hear this little lick at the end. piano's back up again. That EQ came back up again. Here's the curve on the panning and the volume of the piano. I'll go back here. You can see it in the mixing board. Back up just a tad. See it right here. And that shaker's going through there. And at the very end, the piano and the bass are ringing out the longest. I may fade that down in mastering. But all the other instruments, you can see these lines here are drawing the curve down to fade them out. And all the instruments also have a curve at the end of them, so there's no pop or any unwanted noise at the end of their part. Maybe turning off your system or bumping it or something like that. And everything's nice and clean, and then this thing automatically ends the recording at this point. I always leave a little bit more at the very end when I start the recording. At the beginning, when I set the in point, it's basically just a moment before the sound starts. I'm going to zoom way in. So the recording actually starts right there. Just gives about a half a second, if that, before the sound starts. And that gives you a little bit of play there too. You never want to start it right on that thing, right on the very beginning, because it may clip when you're doing something later. And especially as going to mastering, you can have little heads and tails on it, and you're going to take it off or trim it up anyway. But most of the time, this works fine. You don't have to do anything with the front end. So I think we've covered everything now. We did the final mix as you heard before. We've got this track ready. This will now be exported and brought into mastering, which is next. So we've got a long way to get where we're going here. I hope you stuck with me, and if you have, thank you so much for following this journey. This song has come a long way from the beginning, as you know. Sounds totally different, but it still has that same feel. All the parts work very well together, and I'm very happy with what we got so far. Mastering is going to bring this thing out even more. The mix that I've done now is only using the plugins. Haven't used any mastering plugins. The only thing that I should add is there is one thing that I typically do turn on for a mix of this nature, and that is I run the whole mix through another channel, which would be, and this is the entire mix is run through this board simulator again, with a little bit of drive. And it's difficult with headphones to hear the subtleties of this, but when you monitor through multiple different sets of speakers and headphones, I have 4 different sets in this studio, 4 different speakers that I use in the studio, and I use multiple headphones that I listen through. This particular set of headphones has a switch here that allows for more of a mid-range type of mix. Also, you want to check your mixes in mono, make sure that mono works. So I am very happy we're at this point. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time to do it. If you like the video, ring the bell and all that stuff. The next video coming up is we're going to take this into a mastering session, master this piece, and get it ready for release. So Craig Colley from Craig Colley Music signing off. We finally got the song recorded and mixed, going to mastering, going to market. We're almost there in this journey from recording a song from start to finish. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for hanging out.